Hey, everybody. My guest today is Professor Walter Sinnott-Armstrong, and we're going to talk about the ethical issues with AI. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so what are the big ethical questions about AI?
Well, the biggest, in the sense that it affects everybody everywhere, is this threat that AI is going to become super intelligent and take over the world and turn us all into slaves to do its bidding. We don't really talk about that in our book. It's an interesting and important issue that people should be thinking about, but we focus more on the day-to-day effects of AI on our lives in current society. And AI can have a number of questionable, even harmful effects. So we worry, for example, about safety. Autonomous weapons can lead to people being killed more often or when they shouldn't. AI also raises questions of privacy because it can track where we're going around the world, and then people can find out more about us than we want them to know. AI can lead to injustice when it's used in courtrooms. Criminal defense, for example, often faces AI deciding bail or even sentencing. And there's a responsibility gap that is another ethical issue. If an automobile that drives itself has an accident, who's really responsible? The car, the driver, the government that allowed it, the company that made it. Who is responsible? And if nobody's responsible, we're going to lose incentive to fix these problems. So there are a lot of ethical issues like that, many more than I just listed. I think the real challenge of our book, though, is what are we going to do about it? Because it's easy to just list problems and say, oh, we got to worry about this, we got to worry about that. What are you going to do about it? So the last two chapters of our book focus on our two proposals for solutions. One is to build human morality into artificial intelligence systems. And I can tell you how to do that. The other is to build human morality into AI companies, because often people in those companies don't act in moral ways. So we need to train them and to incentivize them so that they will behave more morally. Not that either of these solutions will solve all the problems, but we hope that they might help a little bit.
Okay, so would you say that each of the examples that you cited has to be treated separately because there are specific ethical issues that relate to them? Or do you think that there is this common thread that goes through all of them?
There are common threads as well as differences. So justice and privacy, well, if you don't grant people the right to privacy, then people are going to find out that you have, say, certain sexual proclivities that they don't like. And then they're going to treat you in unjust ways. And so there'll be less justice because there's less privacy. Uh, and so they can be connected, but they also can be separate because it's not always a matter of privacy that you get treated unjustly. It's not private that one person is black and another person is white. That's publicly seen on the street when you walk around. At least in some cases, in many cases, it's not clear, but in some cases, it's clear. There, the justice issue is separate from a privacy issue. So both, they're connected and also sometimes distinct.
I'm trying to get a better understanding of the relationship between AI and privacy, because it seems that we can have privacy violations without this advanced AI, right? Because people will fill out forms and they'll post certain things on social media, and that can be made public, right? And just through that, people's sexual proclivities could be revealed to others. What is the role of AI in that issue?
So AI, in effect, makes things worse. All of these problems existed long before AI. There were, bad uses of military weapons. There were automobile accidents. There was injustice. There were violations of privacy. All of that existed long before AI. But AI makes it worse because now you can use an appropriate AI system to find out, for example, where you are or who you've had contacts with. The data is so giant that it would be impossible for a human to scour all that data and find out what they need to invade your privacy without the help of AI. So AI gives great power to people. Now, that can be used for good, for example, to help police catch criminals who are going to harm others, but it can be used for evil when it helps police catch people they think are criminals but aren't really criminals. And so what AI does is it speeds it up, gives you more power, and can make the problems worse. But it's not as if it creates the problems to begin with.
Okay. So then AI can be understood as this artificial brain that can process information at an extremely high level, and it can do it very fast, way faster than any human being. So current safeguards that were put in place before the age of AI are insufficient, right? Because maybe the way that social media protects your privacy may be sufficient when it comes to a human being trying to figure out what you like and where you live. But in the age of AI, those safeguards aren't enough. You have to put more safeguards because the computing power of the AI is so great.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even worse because if you pass regulations to try to control the AI, well, the AI can just change itself so that your regulations don't even apply anymore. And so you need adaptive regulations is what people are calling for. It's like drugs. If you say this particular molecule is an illegal drug, well, you can change a little bit of that molecule, and it's still going to have the same psychogenic effects, and yet it's not illegal now because it's not specified as the molecule that's illegal. Well, the same thing happens with AI. You can say it's illegal for AI to access your information in the following way, and then they found a new way to access that information, right? And that can happen extremely quickly. So it's very hard to write government regulations that'll stop all the different forms of AI that can invade your privacy.
Interesting. Okay. So then let's shift gears and talk about autonomous weapons. I've heard of this issue before. The fear is that we will have machines making kill decisions, right? A computer is going to decide who lives and who dies. And we're uncomfortable with that because we think that machines aren't accountable, perhaps, for their actions. You're not going to put a computer in jail or in prison. So we always want human beings to make that final call. Is that the issue?
Well, that certainly is the issue for some people. It's not the issue according to us, but people are really worried about that. One reason they're worried is they think, well, I can go find that war criminal and put them in jail. Well, sadly, that doesn't happen very often. And so it's not clear that we really can and will do the things that people think we can do with humans. Secondly, there's this idea that, well, humans will commit these atrocities, whereas the machines are mindless and will just forge ahead and kill in horrendous ways. Well, wait a minute. Humans kill in horrendous ways. Why do you think humans are going to be better? The issue is not whether AI will be perfect. We know that. It won't. Nothing is perfect. The question is whether it's going to be better than humans. So let's take a particular scenario. You've got to clear out some buildings in Gaza or wherever the war happens to be that year. And if you send soldiers in and they see somebody back in the shadows coming out of a closet or something, they're going to be very likely to be scared to death, and they're going to react very quickly and kill the civilian who really was just hiding there to protect themselves. And it's a very natural reaction for humans. But if it's a robot guided by AI, it can stop, double check before it kills anybody. So an appropriate use of AI in that kind of setting might actually save civilian lives rather than cost them. I think people have too much faith in humans. But if we look at the history, that faith is not always justified.
Interesting. Okay, so in this particular example, there's a combination of two technologies. One is AI, which is like the software, and then the robot, which is the hardware, right? So you're
Yeah,
basically creating artificial soldiers.
yeah. In that particular case, you can also have artificial drones, right, which drive themselves autonomously and sometimes can select targets. So I'll give you another example. This is from Ronnie Yarkin down at Georgia Tech, but I think it's a great example. He says, just imagine that a drone that is controlled by a human is told to kill a certain terrorist cell or a terrorist leader who's in a van. And it just so happens that that van is parked right next to a bus station or a hospital. Well, the human is going to say, my mission is to kill the van, the person in the van. So I'm going to blow up the van. And then a bunch of people in the hospital or at the bus station are going to get harmed as collateral damage. But an AI can very quickly say, wait a minute, I've got satellite data, which suggests that right after parking there, they're going to head west. And if they get 3 miles west, they won't be next to any innocent civilians. And I can just attack them there. So then it circles for a while and hits them where it minimizes civilian casualties. You can't do that with humans because that decision has to be made in a split second.
I see. So you can't have an AI inform the human drone operator because it would be too slow. It has to be a split-second decision not to fire the missile.
Right. And also the human has got all kinds of incentives about, well, if I fail in my mission, am I going to get promoted? Am I going to get yelled at by my commander because he told me to hit that target? And so I'm worried about my own career if I disobey that order. And there are all kinds of emotions and human incentives getting in the way that lead to more civilian casualties. Whereas the AI, if it's properly done, can reduce those casualties. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not always properly done. It can be done very badly, and then it creates a lot more problems. It might even create some systematic problems, like commanders might be more willing to send drones out if they know they're not going to lose any soldiers, right? And so there are other problems to be dealt with, but it's a very difficult balance to say, which is better. It's not obvious that having humans fight our wars is going to be better.
How do you hold a computer accountable for its actions? Or it sounds impossible.
If what you're after is moral blame, I want somebody to blame, then you might not. But you do know how to fix it. When a computer, a self-driving weapon, or an autonomous weapon or a self-driving car does something wrong, you fix the program. There are ways to fix the program. You retrain it on new data. You change some of the weights that it puts on different things. Suppose that a driver has an accident and hits a pedestrian. Well, what happens then? How many other drivers learn from that lesson? Very few. The word doesn't get out. And even if you do punish the person, well, they are punished, but the rest of the world doesn't get any better. Whereas if you have an autonomous car, a self-driving car that runs into a pedestrian, immediately every computer in that fleet of cars is reprogrammed and is less likely to do that again. So if you think about the learning, the speed with which a self-driving car can learn to avoid mistakes, it's a million times faster than humans.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Although, how do we determine if an AI has made a mistake? If they're operating with, trillion bits of data instantaneously, then that means we don't actually understand its decision-making process.
There are ways to make interpretable AI. Cynthia Rudin here at Duke is a master at this and can make something that's 99% as accurate, but is interpretable. And then we do know how it made the decision. But take, for example, one particular car accident with a Tesla where it was driving along the road. It was actually going up a hill. And in the cross traffic, there was a big truck that was white. And the computer misinterpreted the white truck as a cloud in the sky because it was looking up. And so it just ran into it full speed, thinking, that's not something I need to worry about. Now, what we need to do is to train the Tesla on a bunch of pictures of white trucks and clouds and stuff. We don't actually need to know exactly how it's processing that data in order to train it to do better.
Okay. So the empirical assumption is false. We can understand how an AI makes a particular decision, which means that we can identify mistakes that it makes, which means that we can fix the problem by changing its programming.
Yeah. It's not an absolute we can or can't. We can understand certain aspects of the process, like what it's taking into consideration, what it's not taking into consideration. There are various ways of doing that. There are actually new programs where you can find out what it's representing and what it's not representing in the calculations, but not every detail, right? There are always going to be things that remain black boxes to us. But look it, you're a black box to me. I don't know exactly what you're thinking right now or what the processes are going on in your brain. And same, I'm a black box to you. And so the thought that it's different from humans strikes me as way too simplistic. To switch from cars to judges, you ask, like, how are we going to make our legal system better? Well, how are we going to improve judges? Do we really understand how judges make these decisions? The answer is no, no, no. What are we going to do? Whereas AI, we might actually be more successful at solving these problems and improving their performance.
Interesting. What you're saying makes me think of, I guess, the different natures of machines and human beings. So I teach a class on human enhancement, and I feel like just after pondering about it for a little bit, you realize that the advancements in machines is much greater than the advancements in human beings, right? Like, think of our smartphones and how much more powerful they've become in the past 10 years, right? How much better the cameras are. Whereas if you look at human beings, it's like our eyes are not 20% better than they were 10 years ago, right? So the way that we can improve human beings is much more difficult. And you're saying, well, because of this, AI is advantageous, is better in some sense, because we can just make it faster, we can make it more powerful, and we could reprogram it on an instant and have a fleet of cars change the way it behaves in a matter of seconds or minutes. Whereas for human beings, like you can't improve human driving capability within like a day.
Yeah. Now, admittedly, I'm giving you a very optimistic spin on this. And my co-authors in the book, Jana Scheikborg and Vincent Conitzer, might give you a more pessimistic view, because we all recognize that there are both opportunities here and also problems. I can say it's possible to reprogram the machines, to do these things better, but will companies do it? Will we be able to figure out how to do it? Will it create other serious problems? We always have to be very vigilant about the potential problems and misuses and abuses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, the fact that AI can talk to other AI, like the fact that it's all interconnected, I think it's powerful and scary, right? Because if you have one really smart hacker, then you can change, again, the way that all the cars behave in an instant, and then maybe all these cars just crash into walls or like drive off bridges, right? If you want to create mass casualties.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
great example. I mean, what the one we talk about is, programming the car so that it just runs into pedestrians. And you're right. A good hacker might go into the system and reprogram a whole bunch of cars to do that, not just a single car. And then you've got a real problem. So you've got to keep those potential problems in mind as you construct the cars. But I don't think that should make us give up on autonomous cars. I think that should make us develop them more safely and more carefully.
Are you a Star Trek fan?
Yeah. I mean, old Star Trek. You got to remember, I'm an old guy. So
Okay. Yeah. The reason why I ask is that I love Star Trek, and my favorite bad guy is the Borg.
Hmm.
And I don't know how much you know about the Borg, but they're this, this alien race, and they're kind of like half biological and half artificial life forms, right?
Ah,
And they're all connected. They're kind of like a beehive in a sense, right? And what they do is assimilate other civilizations, and that involves like killing people and like basically like kidnapping these people and like attaching these Borg technology onto them, and then they turn into Borg, and they're all part of the collective, right? And there's like strength in that, right? Because they all act in one thing. But a way to undermine it is like, well, maybe you can upload some sort of virus and then it infects all the other Borg, and then we can just shut down the entire colony, right? So like the interconnectedness is a strength and its weakness.
yeah. I mean, that's true in a lot of cases for humans as well. I don't know enough about the Borgs to comment about them, uh, but any society that has a single autocratic leader that everybody loves and looks up to, you can affect them all by affecting the leader. And so you can change the whole hive. That's one of the problems with dictators and autocrats. Whereas in democracy, you can't do that. You can't change the whole thing by changing one particular point. It means that it's going to happen much more slowly, and then there are less problems for less dangers, I guess is the better way to put it, of it going wildly wrong.
Okay. So I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is there are two ways to kind of address these moral issues. One is to program morality into AI, and the other is to ensure that the companies that make the AI embody ethical principles. So let's take them each one by one. So how would you program, like, well, first, in order to program morality in AI, wouldn't you have to decide on what morality is?
No, actually. I mean, one way to do it would be to take your own morality and just build it into the AI and have the AI apply that. But of course, then you're going to disagree with me on that. And, I'm a consequentialist, and maybe you're a Kantian, and we're just going to disagree and never work it out. Our method avoids that by using surveys. So the test case, the pilot case that we've done most fully regards kidney allocation. For example, you have to decide who gets a kidney. There's one kidney available, and there are two patients who need it, patient A and patient B. And you have to decide who does it. Now, that's a moral issue because it affects their welfare. It should be done fairly, and so on. So the first thing we do is we survey people and ask them which features of patient A and patient B should determine which of them gets the kidney. And we collect their answers. And any answer that more than 20%, or so say is relevant, we go, okay, well, that's potentially relevant. Uh, Notice race, gender, sexual orientation, that's not going to be in there. I mean, we're getting way less than 5% saying that that's relevant. And so we take the features that are potentially relevant, and then we refine them and supplement them, and then create conflicts between these features. So you might, for example, have patient A is, I don't know, 31 years old, and patient B is 50 years old. And so people who think, well, it's better to give a kidney when it's going to do more good, and that means higher life expectancy. So the younger person is probably favored. So patient A is favored. But wait a minute, patient A doesn't have any children, whereas patient B has two children that depend on them. So now that favors patient B. So you create conflicts like that, and then you ask, well, who should get the kidney in that case? And then you can find out how much people weigh the different factors, right? And you do a series of those, and you use machine learning to predict what they would do in other cases that they haven't answered yet. So we can ask people, 30 of these scenarios, and then get over 92% accuracy in predicting what they would do on a separate set of 30 more. And so it can predict what these humans would say. Now, morality is not decided by votes, so that's not what we're doing here. we can now correct for ignorance. Like when I started doing this, I didn't know how long people were on dialysis when they're waiting for a kidney transplant. Is it 2 hours a week or is it 6 hours a day, 5 days a week? And the answer is it's more like 6 hours a day, 5 days a week in many cases. And that really affects whether you can take care of your children and whether you can hold down a job and stuff like that. Whereas 2 hours a week wouldn't do that. So we have to make sure they know about kidneys. And then what we can do is look for correlations. We can intervene to get a causal relation. And then we can correct for ignorance about the case that you're making the decision. We can project what you would say if you were fully informed. And then we can also correct for bias, and we can correct for stability or inconsistency over time. And so then what we end up with is a prediction of what you would say about who should get the kidney if you were more informed, less biased, more consistent. Now, of course, that's just for the individual. Individuals will still differ. We have to aggregate them, and then we have to figure out a method of aggregation because there are a number of different methods. Notice that's a philosophical issue. That's a social issue. But the technical issue is, can we do this prediction? And we've been able to do it pretty well in the kidney case. We're now starting to work on other cases and applications as well. But that's how you build AI into, that's how you build human morality into AI without just taking your own theory and applying it. You're actually doing surveys to find out what other people think about these cases and then projecting what they would say in idealized circumstances.
But doesn't that approach still assume that morality is dictated by the majority or the majority, the idealized majority?
So it's not that it's dictated, no. I would never say that what's morally right or wrong is constituted or defined or dictated by even the idealized majority. But I do think that if the idealized majority, let's say supermajority, if 3/4 of people in idealized circumstances think that something's wrong, that's pretty good evidence it's wrong. It's not proof, people can go astray, but it's better than non-idealized circumstances. And it's probably less likely to go horrendously off in the wrong direction than if we simply, follow some lone philosopher who has this theory that nobody agrees with. So it's not that it's perfect. It's not proving anything. It's not dictating morality. It's giving us better evidence about who ought to get the kidney.
Yeah. I'm wondering if this approach is committed to any particular meta-ethical positions. Like, does this approach necessarily mean that you believe that there's objective morality or that there isn't objective morality? You know what I mean? Because if you think that there is such a thing as objective morality, then you could employ this method and be like, yeah, this is a way to approximate objective morality. If an idealized majority are in favor of X and not Y, that's a good guess, right? And maybe if you're not a believer in objective morality, you can say, well, morality is somehow relative, okay? And given that, this is also the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think you could be either an expressivist of some sort, or a relativist of some sort, or a moral realist of some sort. All of those theories could accept this as a general argument that this is evidence of what you should think. Because even subjectivists will say, it's not just that I think abortion is wrong or I think abortion is not wrong. I should think that way. So they've got this kind of meta level, and that's where this kind of theory can come in. So subjectivists and realists can both accept it.
Okay, so then it's like an overlapping consensus about the approach to determine what principles to program into these AI systems.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an overlapping consensus yet because I hadn't convinced everybody yet. But The hope is that it will become an overlapping consensus. Yes.
Okay. So what about the other issue, which is um, ensuring that these AI companies embody ethical principles? Is that still kind of the same approach? You kind of survey people and figure out what the idealized majority believe that these companies ought to do?
No. I mean, you might use the first method that I just outlined to set the standards that you want to teach for those companies, though. But that's not going to be enough. The question is, if I come to them with all my surveys and I say, people in idealized circumstances would want you to do this, are they going to listen to me? That's the problem of our last chapter. We have to have technical tools that they can institute into their processes, because these things happen so fast that if we, say, well, let's have the ethics committee consider it, 2 weeks later is too late, and the committee doesn't meet all the time. We have to have these agile public policies that I talked about, that, will change as things go. We have to incentivize people in the companies, as well as in their real lives, to care about morality. We have to provide career-long training, not like a one-day seminar, or, go listen to a 1-hour talk. That's not going to do any good. And I think we have to engage civic participation, to comment on what the companies are doing. But if I had to pick one thing to focus on here, because it's a very complex issue, how do you get the companies to pay attention? So I'm going to pick one thing. I'll admit it. I'm an optimist. I actually think most people are good. There are great movies about the Borgs, and, of course there's Hitler and Pol Pot and all kinds of horrible people have existed in this world, but most people are pretty good people, including most people that work in these companies. I think one big problem is they don't even notice that there's a moral issue. They're told, you've got to get us this product next week. And they're working 12, 16-hour days in order to get the product to their boss the next week, because it's a real scramble and competition against the other. And so they don't even notice. So what we want to do is develop a training program that will make people more sensitive. We call it moral sensitivity. We want them to notice there's a moral problem, whereas before they would have just forged ahead and done what their boss told them. Give you an example to make it a little more concrete. Suppose that the boss says, well, we want you to take this system of hospitals and update their computers to have more efficient and cooperative use of electronic medical records. Okay. And then in the scenario that we use, the person says, well, what kind of computers are they? And they say, well, we've got this 5th generation computer in a lot of our hospitals. Some of them are still in the 4th generation. We're going to upgrade those later. And so what we want you to do is to program it for the 5th generation computers. And then when the 4th generation gets upgraded, it'll just transfer over immediately. Now, you could go, that kind of makes sense, but wait a minute. What you ought to be asking is, who has those 4th generation computers? If it's the poor, disadvantaged communities that have the 4th generation computers, then, whoa, wait a minute. You're programming it for the people who already have the better computers and are already advantaged, and it's going to be even more disadvantaged for these groups that are already suffering. So that's the kind of moral issue that people don't even think about. They just go, okay, I'll do it for the 5th generation computer. They ought to be thinking about the background problems that this might arise. So we have training programs for how to, get people to be more sensitive to moral issues when they're working in these companies. That's just one example that I'm particularly interested in.
Interesting. Okay. So that sounds like to be more of like a business ethics thing. And because some businesses, do tech stuff and AI stuff, it would just apply to them as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're also using this training program in the military. And you can use it in other kinds of businesses as well, like for hiring. And so you're absolutely right. Moral sensitivity is a big issue in lots of training programs. We just happen to be applying it to AI companies.
Okay, so then the main issue perhaps could be split up into two components. One is ignorance. Maybe they're just not even thinking about how this particular thing has moral implications. And the other is motivation. Or maybe you already think because most people are good, they don't have to be motivated.
So I think absolutely ignorance and motivation, but I want to add a couple more. I think moral sensitivity is different from ignorance. These people might be really smart. They're forging ahead and not thinking about what they're doing, and they end up, committing immoral actions and making immoral decisions because they didn't think about it. It's not that they're ignorant, it's that they're not using the information that they know, right? And motivation, they have, knowledge, sensitivity. The other thing they need is the ability to think through a complex problem. Because morality is not the kind of thing like, okay, this is what you ought to do. It's often many different factors pointing in different directions. You got to make sure you know everything. You got to make sure you've heard from the various stakeholders. You have to know how to do it right. So in addition to being motivated, to having the knowledge, and to being sensitive, you have to avoid confusion by knowing how to deal with a complex issue. And that takes training as well.
I mean, that sounds like something philosophers are really good at. It's critical thinking, right?
It certainly is critical thinking. I've done a lot on critical thinking. I've got a MOOC and stuff like that on critical thinking. And you're absolutely right. This is just applying critical thinking in this particular area.
What do you think is the most difficult ethical issue in regards to AI?
The most difficult to solve, you mean?
Sure.
The most difficult to solve, I think, that's a good question. I have to think about that. I think probably the most difficult to solve is the problem of privacy, because I don't know what to do about it. You can say, well, let's have everybody give consent to the use of their information, but everybody just does it. They go, can you have these, do you sign off the ability of the company to sell your information? And then once the information is out there, you can't get rid of it. It's out there forever, and even right now, there's so much information out there that we cannot withdraw and we cannot make the computers forget it. We can say, well, let's anonymize data. Well, there are all kinds of ways to de-anonymize the data, and they can find out. So, for example, any kind of brain scan information, well, if it's analyzed the right way, they can figure out whose brain it is. And so, because everybody's brain has a little bit different shape, it's like a fingerprint. And so you can figure out who it is. And they can figure out where you're going. I don't know exactly how to stop that spread of information. And I think a lot of people find it very frightening. So even if it's not misused, it'll be a damper. It'll be a barrier to them being able to live the kind of lives that they want to live.
Yeah, I was thinking about, people just consenting to this stuff. Because I almost feel like there's implied consent when we sign up for these social media platforms or create an account for whatever website, for whatever service. And I think this might be more true for the younger generations because they kind of grew up with this stuff. They just kind of assume that you don't have privacy anymore. And because of that, they almost devalue it.
I think that's a big problem of devaluing privacy as well. They seem to not care, but sometimes they should care. And you can say it's implied consent, but it's not informed consent. So you can say implied consent because they know what's going to happen and they think that's okay, so they go ahead. But they don't know what's going to happen, right? If you tell people, look, we can find out where you live and where you had lunch last Tuesday. People are surprised. They don't think that you can do that. It's like, whoa, of course you can. It's not hard at all. Even if you bought with cash, you can find it out because you got your iPhone. They're tracking you all the time. You know, if you've got your weather app on and it's set so that it tells you this is your location so that you can find out the weather prediction for your location, then they can use that data to find out exactly where you were. Most people don't know that. I think they consent because they don't know that. If they knew how much power it gave people, then they wouldn't consent unless they thought, we're going to know that even without, regardless of whether I consent or not, they're still going to be able to know that. Sure. But notice, for example, if you turned off your iPhone, they would know where you are before you turned it off, but they wouldn't know where you are afterwards. So there's going to be less privacy violation if you don't consent. It's not that your privacy is completely protected if you refuse to consent. The trick is these apps are useful. You want them in your life. You want to be able to take advantage of them because they do great things for you. So how do you know when to consent and when not to consent? One answer is we'll always consent, because they're going to know it anyway. I just gave my argument against that. They might not know it in the future if you stop consenting. My argument against the never consent is you're not going to be able to use the apps. So the trick is going to be when should you do one rather than the other? And nobody really, is able to answer that question because you got to read 20 pages of detailed stuff that you don't understand anyway. And nobody reads it. They just go ahead and consent. What the hell? I'm going to give up. I don't have the time. And I think that's a real problem. It's not clear what the solution is. I mean, we have a proposal to build a computer program to oversee that, to determine when you want to consent or not, depending on your values. We have ideas about how to do that, but nobody's ever built such a thing. So I'm a philosopher. I'm kind of speculating. Wouldn't that be great if somebody could build that? And I think they could, but it's not even clear that would really solve the basic problem. Our society is changing in that way. And I don't know how to, I think that's the most difficult problem, which is what you asked.
My suspicion is that this problem is going to resolve itself over time because the younger generations will be informed in that way, right? Like once these technologies become more and more popular, it's going to become common knowledge. It's like, yep, once I upload a picture of myself on Instagram, somebody else can take it and, make me say stuff that I didn't really say, right? They can just put me in random videos, we can create AI generated videos of Trump and Biden and have him say ridiculous things, right? So once that becomes common knowledge, then the kids are going to be like, oh yeah, that is a risk, but I still want to use the app, so I consent.
I mean, I guess, but I think a lot of kids are going to go, yeah, you're going to bother to create those videos of Trump and Biden, but not of me. I mean, why would you waste your time creating a video like that of me?
Yeah, I don't know. It could be somebody doesn't like you. And so
it could be, but I'm not worried so much about the videos because they're hard to make. They're only going to be used for kind of leaders in society, or if somebody has a real grudge against you as an individual. It's other kinds of invasions of privacy that I think, that's more kind of misinformation, which is a big problem. I'm not denying that, but it's separate from, the invasions of privacy. I'm thinking about people who, want to hold a political view that their, friends don't agree with, or who want to engage in a certain kind of sexual activity that they don't want their friends and family to know about. Those kinds of things are going to become more and more dangerous if you can just find it all out on the internet. And so that's going to mean that those people are reluctant to live the kind of lives that they want to.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to do is kind of go back to the driving example because I think it's interesting. So I've heard of cases where, there were real life trolley problems, right? Like, does the car swerve to the left and hit this other car? Does it swerve to the right and hit this pedestrian? And kind of like, how do you weigh those things? And you're saying, well, the way to address it is for us to survey people. When you mean survey people, you mean like just civilians? You mean everybody who wants to participate?
Yeah, I mean, in a case like a medical case, you would also want to survey experts who know a lot more about the situation. But in the car case, you would certainly survey the general public. Yeah.
Okay. And whatever the idealized majority would say yes to, then that is what should be programmed into it. Now, there are cases where I have heard of where maybe the decision that the car has to make is to preserve the driver over other people, even if other people outnumber the driver, right? And that makes sense. We're generally, more selfish. I will want my car to prioritize my life over 10 strangers, over 20 strangers, right? But from a moral perspective, I don't know if that's right.
No, I think that's absolutely right, because if you people will do that because they're selfish. So what you need to do is just say, do you think that this decision as a general policy should be made on the basis of what's good for society as a whole? And so you ask about the policy question rather than the individual thing. You also can ask them about a third party. Suppose there's a car that does this rather than that, and you're not involved. You're not the passenger or right? Now, what do you think ought to be done? And there, in those two cases, the policy case and the third party case, they tend to give basically utilitarian answers. They want to maximize the benefit because they're equally likely to be the pedestrian as the passenger. And so now they're worried about everybody. But if you tell them what role they're playing in the scenario, you're in the car, then they go, oh, now I want the car that does this, right? So then you ask them, well, is it fair? Would you want other people in society to be driving cars that made it more dangerous for you? And they go, no, right? So you have to get them thinking in this kind of impartial third party or policy oriented way rather than their individual selfish way. That's how you make regulations for the society. And you can actually just tell companies, actually Germany has laws that require companies to build cars so they do not favor the driver over the people on the street, the pedestrians, or people in other cars for that matter. And the argument for that is, well, you shouldn't make policy knowing that you're going to be the driver.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like we're operationalizing the veil of ignorance, right? You're placing people behind the veil of ignorance. You don't know who you're going to be.
Except Rawls always gets credit for the veil of ignorance. What I just described is actually John Harsanyi's theory of justice that he uses to argue for a rule utilitarianism. Rawls has to build all kind of other stuff that's questionable in order to get his difference principle and his views. But I'm a consequentialist, so I want to say it's Harsanyi.
Okay. I think it's a good place to wrap things up. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This has been a very enjoyable conversation.